But I think in either way, once you have encryption at this level, once you have bandwidth at this level, something starts to emerge. And what we saw in Bitcoin history was, pre-Bitcoin, David Chaum in the early 1980s published literature on how to do decentralized ledgers or databases. That was kind of the precursor to Bitcoin. Then we saw proof of work and Hashcash get invented. Then we saw reusable proof of work tokens they were almost Bitcoin, but they were reliant on a centralized server. And these things are only happening obviously because the Bitcoin network exists and the asset exists and it's exciting and it's a solution for a lot of the problems that we're talking about. So I would say certainly in some of those more qualitative ways, it's been impactful. And then obviously the desire to kind of focus on Bitcoin more than just traditional finance can only happen because of Bitcoin. So yeah, it changed my life.
In addition to examining markets, Lyn Alden is also experiencing the change they bring about. Lyn provides a unique blend of academic rigor and practical insight to the Bitcoin field because to her engineering background and extensive knowledge of global macroeconomics, what distinguishes her is not only her ability to think clearly, but also the conviction that drives her path. From penning some of the most reputable financial studies to actively funding Bitcoin-related projects, in the rapidly changing digital economy, Lyn has emerged as a crucial voice. She sees Bitcoin as a tool for economic empowerment, a global network, and a philosophical revolution in addition to a financial asset. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications before we delve further. Thank you and enjoy the video.
And what I think is cool about Bitcoin is it's a solution to a lot of the problems. It kind of added optimism to how I view the current system. And it's the only asset that I fly around the world to talk about, right? So I'm in Madeira here to talk about Bitcoin. There's a lot of friends in my life that I only knew because of our shared interest in Bitcoin. A lot of the businesses I'm involved in, I'm on the board of a Bitcoin company. I'm a general partner of Ego Death Capital, a Bitcoin venture firm. And these things are only happening obviously because the Bitcoin network exists and the asset exists and it's exciting and it's a solution for a lot of the problems that we're talking about. So I would say certainly in some of those more qualitative ways, it's been impactful. And then obviously the desire to kind of focus on Bitcoin more than just traditional finance can only happen because of Bitcoin. So yeah, it changed my life. So there's 160 different currency arcades out there. There's a handful of monies like gold and dollars that can kind of flow between them and get recognized as money in every arcade. And Bitcoin is quickly becoming another one of those, and probably over time the best one. It's already, there's more things I can do with Bitcoin in New Jersey, Norway, and Egypt than I can do with any of those weaker currencies anywhere else. So I think that it's not quite at the level of, say, gold or dollars yet, but in a 15-year time frame, that trajectory has already put it in the top 10, maybe the top 5 monies that if you bring with you, you could do something with it. If you come to Madeira with Bitcoin, there's a lot of places where you can convert or spend it. And that's true for a lot of different countries around the world, a lot of different specific regions within countries. And so I think that what's happening is that over time, Bitcoin can displace a lot of the weaker currencies and start working its way up the food chain, and that's what it's already been doing. And people around the world will hold a larger and larger percentage of their liquid, cash value in Bitcoin rather than their local currency. But I think in either way, once you have encryption at this level, once you have bandwidth at this level, something starts to emerge. And what we saw in Bitcoin history was, pre-Bitcoin, David Chaum in the early 1980s published literature on how to do decentralized ledgers or databases. That was kind of the precursor to Bitcoin. Then we saw proof of work and Hashcash get invented. Then we saw reusable proof of work tokens they were almost Bitcoin, but they were reliant on a centralized server. And then they figure out, Satoshi figured out how to break this up, how to distribute this, how to have a control loop to take into account faster processing time. So I think that Bitcoin would reemerge given enough technology, kind of like how if you go from Paleolithic to Neolithic, and then eventually you find hydrocarbons, and fewer people have to farm because you can mechanize the farming, and more people can work on other things, and they can develop medicine and running water and things like that. Eventually, if the world's not hit by an asteroid or something doesn't disrupt that process, you reach that extra point. And I think that's where we are with money. I think that given enough time, you eventually recreate digital value and start threatening these power structures. And I think that there's some timelines where maybe it takes longer because some of the early actors are not good, and it has to kind of restart the process a couple times. And I think we're so far on a pretty good timeline where the first person to figure it out did it in a very ethical way, in a very well-designed way. And then also, I would say that there's plenty of, people ask how much should you have in Bitcoin, like as a ratio of your liquid net worth. And I think that there's really no wrong number other than zero. I think zero is the wrong number. So I think the first step is get off zero, get some Bitcoin. Your ability to withstand the volatility that Bitcoin is going to go through and any sort of risks you perceive is partially tied to how much you know about Bitcoin and how convicted you are about Bitcoin. So I wouldn't necessarily tell someone who's brand new, hey, put half your net worth in Bitcoin, because as soon as there's like a 70% crash, they're going to get scared and sell at the bottom, and that's worse than if they never invested in Bitcoin, right? So it's like start at the percentage that you think makes sense relative to what you've learned. And so I think holding it, if you get enough that self-custody makes sense, pull it on the chain, self-custody yourself for long term. And I think that's how you get involved. And you can try out, payment wallets if you want to. You can go to meetups. I think one of the powerful things we're seeing is that there's all these little hubs forming, grassroots hubs in different countries. So one of the earlier ones is Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador. And there's other ones, Bitcoin Ikasi, there's Bitcoin Jungle, there's the Africa Bitcoin Conference, there's the Indonesia Bitcoin Conference, there's Madeira, for example. These are hubs where there's been enough concentration of Bitcoiners to start some degree of merchant acceptance. Some of them have their own kind of self-custody wallet that works for the community. So look around in your own country and kind of get involved in any of those that are happening. If there's not one, then try to start one.
Bitcoin and encryption in general are contributing to the restoration of privacy, which has been lost in the digital age. Bitcoin safeguards our financial lives in the same way that doors, walls, and locks do for our houses. It makes it more difficult for corrupt individuals or governments to seize someone's money with only one click. Rather, they would need to invest actual time, effort, and resources just to make an attempt. This goes beyond theory. Stories from the real world are shared by Lyn Alden, such as Togolese campaigners whose bank accounts were stopped for just opposing corruption. Bitcoin is more than simply an investment to them and billions of others worldwide. It is an instrument for liberty. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest videos. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Now let's dive back into the interview.
Fast forward to today, everybody's using these centralized digital ways to transfer value to each other, and so anyone who wants to transact privately is often viewed as weird. Like, well, I have nothing to hide. What are you trying to hide with your private transactions? And yet, that's just the default has shifted, even though the need for privacy has not really shifted. And so Bitcoin's in that boat where people kind of like, well, what do you mean you want like money outside of the state, like money that can't be just debased or that can't be stopped? Like, what kind of bad things must you be up to? And that's not really how it works. I would remind the audience that there are 200 countries in the world. Some of them are fairly benign. Other ones are fairly harsh. You can imagine if you're in any one of the countries that's run by dictators and things like that. I mean, we're in Madeira right now at Bitcoin Atlantis, and then I was on stage with Farida. She's from Togo, where democracy advocates would have their bank accounts frozen and seized and things like that, right? And that's one example of dozens and dozens out there. And so basically, for anyone who thinks Bitcoin has no value, they're often from fairly privileged environments. In the United States, most people don't, even though there's subtle problems with the system, most people don't go throughout their day and think, man, payments are really hard to make. And for savings, they can plow money into the S&P 500, right? Whereas in many countries in the world, they don't have that. Their money debases more quickly. There's 40 currencies in Africa, over 40 currencies. Imagine the friction of trying to do trade across 40 different currencies. Latin America has like 30 plus different currencies. These are all frictions that people face in their more daily life. And Bitcoin comes along, and Bitcoin is money that can't be debased, money that flows across borders, money that is very hard to censor. There's a high cost to trying to censor the network. And so that's all it is. And people are kind of like, they're so ingrained in the current system, they can't see why that would be valuable to people. And it's money that's portable. You can bring it with you around the world. You can self-custody it. No centralized entity can debase it. And if people want to, if you're doing something illegal, law enforcement can still extend resources to stop you from what you're doing, but the burden lies on them to expend resources to get you to stop. They can't just freeze your money arbitrarily outside of the rule of law and ask questions later. It kind of shifts power back closer to the people. That there's still power structures out there, but it now shifts the effort to them. I think another way of putting it is that it used to be that privacy was expensive to violate. Right? So if you wanted to violate someone's privacy for maybe a good reason, you had to go through their physical possessions, follow them around, do things like that. But in the digital age, privacy is just easy to violate. Big databases can just collect any information they want. They can organize it with AI, and the default is not to be private. And so encryption is basically reintroducing the equivalent of walls and doors and things like that in a digital world. It's basically making it so that there's effort to violate someone's privacy, that resources have to be expended for a good reason to do it, sometimes a bad reason, but either way. And Bitcoin is the same thing for money, that it basically, the default can be towards non-debasement and censorship resistant, and if someone wants to interfere with that, there's a cost for them to trying to do so. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing, and I think that people don't think that way now too much, but I think that in other eras, that was the norm.
Lyn Alden explains to us a crucial aspect of how the planet has evolved. In the past, seclusion was commonplace. It was impossible for anyone to follow you if you paid with cash. You had to be followed about or have your personal stuff searched if someone wanted to know what you were doing. Such monitoring required time, effort, and a valid purpose. However, the majority of our lives now take place online. We use digital platforms for communication, cards for shopping, and applications for money transfer. Additionally, it's now very simple for businesses, governments, or malicious actors to monitor what we're doing, where our money is going, and even to abruptly cut or freeze our access in this new digital world. We no longer have privacy by default. We have lost it without recognizing it. Bitcoin and encryption can help with it. Like reinstalling doors, walls, and locks in our online life, these tools are assisting us in restoring our digital privacy. With Bitcoin, it's considerably more difficult for someone to steal your money without your consent. While breaking the law does not absolve someone of responsibility, it does indicate a change in authority. Anyone attempting to meddle must follow the correct procedures and put forth genuine effort, rather than having their money frozen without warning. Lyn cites examples from the actual world, such as Togolese democracy campaigners who had their bank accounts closed for just opposing their government. In such circumstances, Bitcoin turns into a means for freedom and survival rather than only an investment. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for more valuable content, and as always, happy investing.